And alien women sold for nothing, until a human changed everything. There was a time when songs could save a soul, but here, on Veron's edge, even silence had a price. The auction block reeked of heat-treated steel and synthetic spices masking human filth, sweat, old fear, and unclean breath. The crowd gathered not with pity, but with the hollow amusement of people who'd long stopped believing in the sacredness of anything. A few leaned in, slurping rehydrated drinks. One child laughed when a trembling male alien dropped to his knees, chains clinking, begging in a language no one bothered to translate. Willie stood at the edge of the plaza, boots planted in dust that had never known rain, watching as another soul was walked out like surplus equipment. He hadn't planned to stay. He never planned to stay. But then she emerged, tall, barefoot, skin the deep violet of a dying twilight, marked with fading tattoos like fragmented constellations across her arms and collarbone. Her hair was white, unnaturally so, falling straight and unbound at the middle of her back, dulled with grime. A walking contradiction, regal in bearing, wrecked in form. Her eyes didn't search for help. They avoided contact entirely. The auctioneer didn't bother with pageantry. Non-fertile, no chip access, no technical imprint, no speech on record, no use, low utility, starting bid, 1.7. A ripple of laughter moved through the onlookers. One vendor spit into the sand and muttered something about defective stock. Willie's breath caught in his throat. She didn't flinch at the laughter, didn't plead. But her hands, thin, veined, twitched slightly at her sides. One curled inward, brushing across her left forearm, where a half-erased spiral tattoo pulsed like it had memory. She shifted her weight minutely, as if grounding herself against invisible noise. Shame, maybe, or something deeper. He shouldn't have looked, should have kept walking, like always. But he didn't. Instead, he remembered. He remembered a boy, years ago, on a similar block. Young, frantic, speaking a rare dialect of gel, screaming about memory flames. Willie had watched that boy sold for half a food credit. He remembered the guilt afterward, not for watching, but for understanding the dialect and saying nothing. He'd been an academic then, still respected, still hopeful. He remembered the silence that followed, his silence, and how the galaxy had thanked him for it with disgrace and exile. So now he moved forward. No plan. Just the raw instinct that something sacred was bleeding out in plain sight, and once again, no one cared. The auctioneer barely looked up as Willie raised his wrist to transfer the credits. "You sure?" he asked, bored. "She's useless, man." "She's not," Willie said, transaction complete. The biometric chain snapped from her wrist with a low click. She didn't look at him, just turned toward the canyon, waiting. No thanks, no question. He led the way in silence. The walk back to the cliffside dwelling took nearly an hour through brittle terrain scorched red and gold. Above them, Veron's edge hung in its eternal dusk cycle, an atmosphere dome barely holding back the cold. The air was thin but livable. Everything here ran on backup systems and forgotten tech. No one important came to Veron, which was why Willie had chosen it. The hut was carved into the canyon itself, ancient stone shaped by long-dead machines. Solar-heated water lines, a manual oxygen scrubber, reinforced pressure doors, simple, safe, and private. A place where things could be remembered without being seen. He opened the seal and stepped aside. She didn't move at first. Her eyes lingered on the entrance, on the symbols faintly carved into the doorframe. Old rune script, faded, but intact. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Then she stepped inside. The temperature adjusted, cycling gently. The air was thicker here, infused with sterilized moisture. She took it in silently, gaze brushing over shelves of worn notebooks, rolled scrolls, sealed ration packets, and a narrow cot in the corner. He didn't speak, just set down a wrapped cloth near the basin and a food tray on the table. A moment passed, heavy as stone. Then quiet but clear, he said, "This is yours now. No chains, no orders. Rest if you want. Eat or don't. I won't come close." She didn't nod, just stood still as he moved away, settling across the room with a worn journal open in his lap. The soft click of his pen filled the space between them. That night, he heard the water running, the slow, unsure movement of someone not accustomed to being alone while washing, the creak of the basin lid, then silence again. When she emerged, she was wrapped in the cloth. Her hair was damp, brushed straight. She didn't speak, but she moved differently, not confidently, but intentionally. She picked up the food tray, sat cross-legged near the heating unit, and began to eat. At first, she moved too quickly, like someone who didn't know when the next meal would come. She nearly choked. Her hand rose instinctively to cover her mouth. Then she slowed, chewed, breathed. The way she exhaled afterward, it wasn't relief. It was disbelief. She didn't finish, left the last third untouched, and pushed it gently aside. Then she chose a place on the floor near the wall, not the cot, and curled up facing the stone, hands tucked beneath her head, back tense, shoulders curled like a shield. Willie didn't disturb her. He closed the journal, hadn't written a single word. He lay on the cot with his back turned, eyes scanning the slow pulse of the ceiling condenser. One drop, then another. He should have left her alone, should have walked away like before, but he couldn't shake the way she touched that tattoo, like it hurt, like it meant something forbidden. Later, long after the light dimmed, a sound drifted through the room. It was faint, a breath more than a song, notes maybe, too quiet to name, but arranged in a rhythm that stirred something old in his memory, something he had read once, in a scroll kept in secret archives. He froze. The song. It shouldn't exist anymore. A rune lamentation, a memory song, something only the oral priestesses of the old Ilarian line were ever taught. She shouldn't know it. He shouldn't recognize it. But he did. Or worse, he remembered. And though she didn't see him, didn't know he was listening, something in her voice felt like a beginning or a warning. Either way, he didn't sleep. The second morning began in silence, just like the first. But something had shifted. Willie noticed it before he opened his eyes. A subtle change in the weight of the room. The air felt warmer, not by temperature, but by presence. No humming this time, no song, just a hush that didn't feel empty. He sat up on the cot, his back stiff from another night of half-sleep. Across the room, she was awake, already dressed in the same wrap, freshly dried. Her white hair, still slightly damp, was pulled back, not in vanity, but in a kind of order. She had rebraided it, simple and neat, the way some species did for mourning or ritual. She sat on the stone floor near the heating coil, legs tucked beneath her, hands resting in her lap. She didn't look at him, but she was clearly aware of his gaze. She held herself with that same quiet, unspoken alertness, like she was still waiting to see what kind of place this was, what kind of man he was. Willie moved slowly, making no sudden gestures. He retrieved a second ration tray, warmed it over the coil, and set it down near her without a word. Then he returned to his side of the room, opened his journal, and began to write. He didn't look up until he heard the faint scrape of ceramic against stone. She was eating again, carefully, slowly, a pace she controlled now. She still left the last third untouched. After breakfast, she rose. No hesitation this time. She moved toward the entrance, fingers brushing the edge of the doorframe, pausing over the faded carvings there. Her thumb traced one of the rune symbols, so faint even he had forgotten it was there. Not a random design, a glyph for memory, or possibly inheritance. Rune was layered like that, meaning curled within meaning. She didn't ask for permission to leave. She didn't need to. Willie watched her step outside into the canyon light, then quietly followed. Veron's Edge wasn't beautiful. It was a graveyard of forgotten projects, sun-bleached ruins, and old colonial scars left by corporations that had long since packed up and moved on. But it was quiet. It gave space to things that needed time. The sun here was filtered through the translucent dome, casting a faint yellow glow on the rust-colored rock. Wind didn't move through this place. The air was too still, too artificial. Even time felt slower. She walked along the ridgeline, keeping close to the wall, her eyes scanning the ground, pausing now and then. After several minutes, she knelt beside a patch of dry sand and began drawing. Willie stayed back, watching without interfering. She moved with intent, not performance. Her fingers etched slow spirals and intersecting lines into the dust. Delicate, deliberate, patterned. Not idle drawing, not random. Rune language again, but not writing. Something older. Diagrammatic memory, symbolic mapping. He moved a few steps closer, careful not to shadow her work. "Is that a chant?" he asked, voice quiet. She didn't answer, not with words, but her hand paused, then continued. He studied the markings, circular symmetry tapering out into 4 directions, each quadrant mirrored with variations, ritual pathways perhaps, or mnemonic anchors. He recognized part of it, the outer ring. It was the structure of a ceremonial story cycle, the kind passed down orally for generations, each ring representing a generational keeper of the tale. His heart kicked in his chest. This wasn't just memory, this was legacy. She drew until the pattern filled a space the size of a blanket. Then she sat back on her heels and looked at it, not proudly but with a strange stillness, as if the act of creating it had cost her something. Then abruptly she reached out and smeared her palm across one of the lines, wiped it away. Willie stepped forward without thinking. Wait. She froze. Her fingers hovered above the dirt like she'd touched fire. Her shoulders tensed, her head bowed. He knelt slowly beside the diagram. Close, but not too close. I've seen that pattern before, he said carefully. In a ruins archive on Harzl 4. They thought it was aesthetic. She didn't move. I knew it wasn't. Still nothing. Her breath was shallow. He waited. Then softly she said one word. Wrong. He blinked. It was the first time he'd heard her speak clearly. What was wrong? She looked at him finally. Her voice was raspy but clear. They saw pieces, not roots. Her accent curved through the syllables. Ancient, controlled, not broken, just restrained, like her voice had always been ceremonial. Willie nodded slowly. That's how they catalog everything. Pieces, never the whole. She pressed her hand against the remaining design. They erased the center, always. He understood. The central ring, the storyteller, the matrilineal voice. That was her. That was what she was. He swallowed the dry ache forming in his throat and sat down beside her. Not touching, just present. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated. Her eyes flicked to his face, searching. Then she answered, Alari. It didn't just sound like a name. It sounded like a history being offered. Willie nodded. I'm Willie. He almost added more. What he used to be, where he failed, why he was here. But it didn't seem necessary yet. She already understood something about him, the way she tilted her head slightly, just like she had on the auction block. She'd seen something in him then. Maybe now she knew what it was. She stood slowly, dusting off her hands. The design was ruined now, half erased, but enough remained to hint at what had been. Willie didn't ask her to redraw it. Some things had to be offered, not requested. They walked back together. Inside, she took the food tray from earlier and began to organize the leftovers. Not like someone completing a task, but like someone restoring a pattern. She cleaned the cloths, folded them, arranged the space. Willie said nothing. He returned to his journal, hands still for once. No words formed on the page. His thoughts were too loud. But one truth kept rising through the noise. This wasn't just rescue, this was preservation. That night, the silence between them deepened, but it no longer felt empty. It felt full, like something important was being rebuilt in the quiet. Alari sat cross-legged near the heater, humming again. This time, Willie knew the tune. Not from a book, not from a scroll. From a dream he used to have when he still believed cultures could be saved. He didn't tell her that. He just listened. And when the last note faded, he whispered her name, not to her, but to the space around them, like it was something sacred, because it was. On the fourth day, something changed. Willie noticed it first in the light. The sun lamps filtered through the translucent dome ceiling just as they always had, soft, diffused, the color of warm brass. But the air inside the stone hut felt different, not colder, not warmer, just aware. He rose slowly, pulling on his jacket against the chill from the recycled air unit. Across the room, Alari was already awake. She wasn't curled in the corner anymore. She stood tall, barefoot on the smooth stone floor, with her hands pressed flat to the wall, fingertips feeling along the natural ridges in the rock. Her long white hair was unbound, falling around her shoulders like silk tinged with starlight. She looked like someone remembering how to exist. Willie didn't speak. She turned just slightly, enough to let him know she'd heard him rise. Then she walked toward the basin and began to rinse the cloths, wringing them out with practiced precision, folding them along the seams. Not like a task, like a ritual. The air between them had changed. She no longer avoided movement, or tried to become invisible in her silence. Now she was claiming space, not as property, but as something rooted. He watched her for a while, notebook forgotten in his hands. Later, she emerged from the washroom in clean fabric. She had tied it differently today, less like a drape, more like something ceremonial. A braid now crossed her chest, formed from the thinner strands near her temple, a symbol. He didn't know what it meant, but it meant something. She moved to the shelf beside the heater and began arranging objects again. This time, she didn't just sort by size or color. She laid one small carving, an old tribal idol from the Uralian Exodus cultures, face down, deliberately. Willie glanced up. "Why that one?" She paused. Then quietly, without looking at him, she said, "It sings wrongly." He blinked. The idol was silent stone, salvaged from a derelict research site. "You mean the story's wrong?" Alari nodded once. "The mouth is carved open, but the story it holds is for mourning, not joy." It was the most she'd spoken to him at once. He set down his journal. They carved it for the archives. Probably didn't know what it meant. She turned her head slightly. They never asked. There was no anger in her voice, just a quiet certainty, a judgment without venom. That afternoon, while he filtered water at the collection tap, he heard a sound behind him, soft, rhythmic, not humming, brushing. When he turned, he saw her outside in the dust, kneeling beside a flat stretch of stone. She was drawing again, not circles this time, but an intricate spiral that widened in interlocking waves, like ripples meeting one another on the surface of a still pond. She used a small curved stick, maybe from a broken utensil, to mark the design. Her movements precise, almost ceremonial. He stayed at a respectful distance, squinting down at the pattern. "You remember all of this?" he asked low. She didn't answer. He took a step closer, noting the way her hand hovered above the center, hesitant. "This is a transmission spiral for stories. I saw something like it once. In the ruins on Rishari 6. "No," she said, voice firm but calm. "You saw fragments. This is the full breath." He nodded, stepping back slightly. "You're right." Alari's eyes stayed on the design. "My mother taught me this spiral before I could speak in full sentences. We used it to remember the names of women who died without song." There was a weight behind her words. A silence that followed, not empty, but sacred. "Will you write it down?" she asked, glancing at the journal in his hands. Willie hesitated. "I can," he said, "but it won't carry the shape, not the way you do." She tilted her head at him, not confusion, not disbelief, just quiet curiosity. "It matters how things are held," he continued. "Memory is more than data. It's rhythm. It's the hand that remembers the shape of a name." Alari looked down at her fingers, now dusted with red grit. "Then maybe you should remember it differently." She stood slowly and stepped away from the design. Then with her heel, she began to erase it. Willie's breath caught. "Wait, don't..." But she paused just before she wiped the center clean. "I don't need to carry it all," she said, her voice softer now. "I need someone else to carry it with me." The weight of that landed between them like a confession. Willie took a breath, crouched beside the edge of the spiral, and traced the final arc with his finger. Not erasing, just memorizing the motion. "I'll remember it," he said, "even if I don't understand all of it yet." She nodded once. They returned to the hut together as the daylight dimmed behind the canyon wall. Inside, Alari sat by the heater again, this time facing the bookshelves. She reached out and pulled down one of the older volumes, hand-bound, stitched with coarse thread. It wasn't tech, just paper, fragile, imperfect. She held it in her hands like it was something rare. "Did you make this?" she asked. "I restored it. It was damaged, torn in the middle. I kept what I could." She ran a finger along the seam. "You could have replaced it with a digital copy." Willie smiled faintly. "Some things need to age, to hold breath marks, skin oil, hesitation." Alari held the book in her lap for a long moment, then returned it to the shelf. Then she said, almost like a whisper, "Do you know what they did when they called us non-fertile?" Willie didn't move. He simply waited. "They scanned our bodies, logged our genomes, and stamped us sterile in their records. No trial, no inquiry, just declared us obsolete. No future value." A pause. "My womb still sings when I sleep." Willie felt something twist in his chest, rage, but deeper than rage, a kind of mourning that didn't know where to go. "I'm sorry," he said, because nothing else seemed right. Alari didn't reply, but she didn't pull away either. That night she sang again, not like the nights before. No hesitation, no whisper. It was quiet but full, intentional. And this time Willie recognized the pattern. It was a funeral chant from the old Ilarian archive, forbidden under current doctrine. He'd read a corrupted version in a sealed university vault, dismissed as ritual superstition. But she sang it as though it had never been forgotten, as if she'd been born with it in her lungs. When she finished, the silence that followed didn't feel like an ending. It felt like breath held in reverence. Willie didn't write that night. He sat in stillness beside her, listening with every part of himself. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, and full of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "You're not broken," he said. "You were never broken." Ilari closed her eyes, but she smiled. And this time she didn't sit with her back to the wall. She sat beside him. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to stay. The morning after the chantkeeper had spoken, silence returned. But it was not the silence of fear or suppression. It was the kind that followed sacred things. The stillness after truth is spoken, after something long buried rises again into the light. Willie watched Ilari as she stood near the shelf where the chantkeeper now rested. Her fingers didn't touch it. They hovered, close enough to feel its weight without disturbing it. She wore her wrap tighter today, cinched across her chest with a folded strip of cloth dyed with hand-pressed pigment. Red, faded, ceremonial. Not for protection, for remembrance. "I don't know what to do with it now," she said quietly. Willie looked up from his journal. "You don't have to do anything." I opened it. The songs were heard again. But memory's not a signal. It spreads, echoes. If anyone was listening. He understood. Once something awakens, it doesn't return to sleep without consequence. He stood and crossed to her, keeping a respectful distance. "Tell me what happened, before the auction, before they silenced you." Ilari exhaled, long and controlled. She moved to sit near the heater, crossing her legs slowly, like she carried weight in her bones that she no longer tried to hide. "I was born on the third ridge of the Ilian Valley. Mountain slopes covered in violet moss, and rivers that glowed under moonlight. My mother was a chant keeper, and her mother before her. That's how it always was." She paused. Her eyes weren't distant. They were present, like she was placing the memory gently into the air between them, offering it. "I wasn't supposed to carry the line. I was declared non-fertile after my 13th cycle. No voice of value," they said. "No future. But my mother, she didn't care. She trained me anyway, in secret. At night, we whispered songs into clay jars, wrote memory patterns beneath woven rugs, hid ancestral chants inside lullabies." Willie leaned forward slightly, entranced. "She knew they would come? They always come. Every few generations, someone decides culture is too dangerous. That memory must be centralized, flattened, archived without meaning." Her hands folded in her lap still, composed, but her voice held a quiet fury. "They arrived not with guns, but with laws, permissions, preservation requests. We were told we'd be relocated to cultural centers, to sing in protected spaces. And they took her," Willie said. Ilari nodded. "They said I could stay, that I had no reproductive value, no verified dialect, no use. My mother tried to object. They silenced her mid-chant. She turned to me before they pulled her away. She didn't cry. She sang one line, half a verse. That was her goodbye." Willie sat back, absorbing the image. A mother erased mid-song, a legacy severed by bureaucracy in a clean uniform. "I remember that line," Ilari whispered. "I say it every morning." A beat passed. Then she spoke it aloud, her voice low and steady, an ancient cadence that moved like breath against stone. The words meant nothing to Willie's ears, but the weight of them filled the room. He didn't respond, not with words. He just sat there with her, letting the silence carry it. "I was left behind," she said after a moment, labeled, cataloged, passed from one station to another. They scanned me, stripped my markings, shaved my hair, said I wasn't worth the energy to train. I stopped speaking because no one listened. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, the songs would die. That forgetting would save me. But it didn't, Willie said. Number memory doesn't die in silence. It waits. And it hurts. She reached up, fingers brushing a faint scar above her ear, barely visible under her regrown hair. They tried to extract chant memory through neural resonance. They said it was science, but all it did was burn. Willie felt his stomach twist. I've read about that program. Disbanded, they said. Too invasive. Not disbanded, she said, just hidden better. A bitter stillness settled between them. I failed someone too, Willie said, his voice quiet. Before I left Earth. Ellery looked at him, patient. There was a boy, Jalien. He was fluent in a dialect long thought dead. I met him during a cultural survey on Orlan 12. He spoke with fire, carried songs in his teeth. I documented him, promised protection, but the institution didn't care. His dialect wasn't on their verified list. One night they came for him. I knew it was happening, but I did nothing. He clenched his jaw. I told myself I couldn't stop it, that it was too late, but I just didn't want to lose my clearance, my grants, my voice. He looked up. So I lost it anyway. Alari studied him for a long moment. Regret, she said, can't sing for you, but it can teach you when to breathe. Willie blinked. That line, simple, poetic, was like an old proverb. A weight lifted, not erased. Then, without speaking further, she stood and retrieved something from the shelf, a small folded piece of woven fabric. She sat beside him and slowly unwrapped it. Inside were 3 objects, a tiny fragment of stone etched with rune spiral script, a dried petal sealed in glass, and a sliver of bone carved with a name. My mother's, she said, offering the bone to him. Her name is yours now, too. Speak it when I no longer can. Willie took it with reverence. He didn't speak. His hand closed around the object like it was a promise. They sat together in that narrow space as the artificial sun dipped behind the canyon wall, the last rays catching the edge of the Chantkeeper disc on the shelf. Light brushed its surface like breath on a memory. Willie opened his journal and wrote without hesitation. Not a report, not an essay, just a name, then another, and another. He wasn't documenting a culture. He was helping it live. Alari placed her hand over his. The words didn't need to be said anymore. They had chosen to remember together, and neither of them would ever be silent again. The Chantkeeper hadn't made a sound in days. It sat quietly between Alari's folded garments on the stone shelf, its black surface dulled now, no longer pulsing. But Willie felt its presence every time he passed it, like it had absorbed the songs it carried and was waiting to be called on again. Like it, too, was listening. Alari had been quiet since that night, though not in the way she used to be. Her silence no longer felt like absence. It had weight now, intention. She moved through the space not like a guest, but like someone gathering the strength to return to herself. She still sang, low when she thought he wasn't paying attention. Fragments of old Alarian lullabies, sometimes rhythms without words like heartbeat patterns lost to time. Her voice was stronger now, steadier, and there was something new in it too. Grief still, but softened now by choice. Willie found himself humming sometimes, not the same melodies, but the cadence of her breath would stay with him, echoing through his bones long after she stopped. That morning she sat beside the heating coil, sharpening a piece of soft stone into a marking tool, her eyes focused, fingers steady. The spiral tattoos on her arms looked darker today, or maybe he was just noticing them differently. He crossed the room and sat across from her. No words, not yet. She looked up, then down again. Then finally she spoke. You wrote about us once, before. It wasn't a question. Willie nodded. I wrote a paper on the rune cycle. Not many details. It was mostly dismissed. I read it, she said, before I was taken. His eyes widened slightly. You? How? We had an uplink archive in our mountains. One of the elders downloaded every cultural document flagged for deletion. We stored them just in case the galaxy forgot we existed. And my name? She shook her head. Your paper had no name on it, just the stamp of your old university. But I knew it was human. You described the chant spirals the way we were taught, by breath, by repetition, not by translation. No one else ever understood that. He felt the weight of her words like a wave breaking against him. I never thought anyone read that, he said. I memorized it, she replied, looking him full in the face. When they burned our archive, I carried the shape of it in my head. You described one line of the 4th generation chant. I recognized it immediately. Willie leaned back, stunned. That chant wasn't even in the public records. It was in a locked archive. I only saw it by accident. You remembered it, she said. So I did too. He felt something inside him shift, some old shame, lifted slightly by the simple miracle of her remembering him better than he'd ever allowed himself to remember her people. They were silent again for a while. Then she reached over and touched his hand, soft as breath. You're not just an exile, she said. You're a witness. He looked down at their joined hands. I thought I was just a coward who knew how to write. You were, she said. So was I, but we're not now. Later that evening, Alari led him outside, toward the ridge beyond the canyon wall where the dust was finer and the stone beneath didn't crack with every step. The sky above the dome had darkened into a violet dusk. Shadows played across the cliffs like smoke. She carried a small satchel, one he hadn't seen before, worn, stitched in a pattern of diamond knots. An heirloom. She knelt and unpacked it slowly. A folded scrap of cloth, a shard of blue glass, and a thin length of thread soaked in something aromatic. These are the last tools of my mother's memory craft, she said. I wasn't yet of age when she gave them to me. I've kept them sealed since. Willie crouched beside her. You want to use them now? Number, I want you to. He frowned. Alari, I can't. This is yours. Your legacy. She placed the blue glass shard in his hand. It shimmered faintly under the starlight filtered through the dome. I already carry the songs, she said, but the memories will die if they stay only in me. You remember differently, with your hands, your ink, your quiet. He understood. She wasn't giving him her burden. She was sharing the future of it. He nodded. Then show me how. She guided his hand, tracing the first knot of thread across the dust. A pattern, a lineage. The names of the women before her. One by one, he etched them into the canyon floor. Nothing digital, nothing permanent, but real. Each mark was a vow. When they finished, she looked up at him, a flicker of something rare in her eyes. Pride, maybe, or peace. You are the only man, she said softly, who listened before I spoke. He didn't answer with words. He just stood and offered her his hand. This time, she took it without hesitation. They walked back to the hut in silence, their fingers still linked, the cool stone beneath their feet no longer feeling quite so lonely. Inside, he pulled a fresh page from his journal. For the first time, he wrote her name not as a reference, not as a subject, but as a beginning, Alari, and beneath it one sentence, the woman they tried to erase but failed. Willie sensed it before the signal reached the beacon. He had been outside the cavern entrance, crouched beside a water filter, reinforcing the outer seal of the air intake panel. His fingers worked in silence, but his mind was crowded. Images of Alari singing, of soldiers tearing children from their mothers, of scrolls burned not because they were dangerous, but because they were inconvenient. Inside, Alari was rebraiding her hair. It had grown longer again, soft white strands falling like river silk, wrapped now with thin cords dyed in natural pigments they'd salvaged from the old trade satchels. She moved with steady rhythm, her hands as precise as the chants she carried. This was her morning ritual now. Renew the braid, renew the breath. The sudden hum of the beacon cut through the silence like a blade. Willie was already moving before the second pulse. He entered the chamber fast, heart climbing. The device on the far wall flickered with a new light. 3 blue blinks, then 1 amber. A receive signal, not random static, a reply. Alari was standing already, eyes fixed on the rhythm. What does it mean? She asked. Willie moved to the beacon's worn console, scanning the coded transmission. Short range, no words, just a relay ping. He paused. They're coming. For me, she said. He looked at her. For the voice. She didn't react immediately. She simply turned away and moved toward their pack. Her body moved like it had rehearsed this moment in dreams or nightmares. Her face was unreadable, but her hands trembled faintly when she reached for the fabric-wrapped chant keeper. We don't run again, she said. Willie hesitated. Then we prepare. They didn't speak much after that. The time for explanations had passed. Their movements were efficient, deliberate. He packed only the essentials, the journal, the chant keeper, 2 water cores, a backup ration belt, and 1 flare beacon, low-tech, untraceable, bright enough to blind. Alari carried her mother's satchel. Inside it, the sliver of carved bone, the spiral stone, and a fragment of red cloth, folded so precisely that it still held the scent of old wind and earth. Before they sealed the exit hatch, Alari stood once more in the center of the chamber. She looked at the floor where Willie had etched her ancestral names in rune spiral script. Then she knelt. Her fingers brushed each line, not to erase them, but to memorize them again. Her voice, barely audible, whispered a few syllables of prayer. Let the stone hold what I cannot. Willie stood by the exit, not interrupting. When she rose, her eyes were steady. They left the cavern as the dome above shifted into dawn. They traveled along the lower canyon route, moving fast but without panic. Alari led them through terrain she remembered from chants, not maps. Pathways encoded into songs passed down by voice alone. Vines curled over fossilized machinery. Dust masked old mining rails, long forgotten by any formal registry. By midday, they reached the outer rim of the dome. Alari knelt near a rocky outcrop and began to clear debris from a hidden vent. Behind it, a smuggler's shaft, part of an old emergency evac system. The smell was sharp, metal and earth and ancient air, but the tunnel was intact. They climbed down in silence. Inside, the air was cooler, thinner. The tunnel walls pulsed with faint light from embedded moss, bioluminescent remnants left by scavenger clans decades ago. They reached a control alcove near the tunnel's curve. An old communications node still blinked faintly. Willie approached, pressing his hand to the panel. No interface remained, only a basic transmitter, enough to send a single pulse. He hesitated. Then, in rune pattern rhythm, he keyed in the phrase they had agreed upon days ago. Voice survives. Memory breathes. Dust remembers. The beacon emitted one low pulse, then shut down. It was done. Alari stood beside him, shoulders square. She looked calm, but her left hand gripped the satchel tight against her side. She didn't ask what came next. She already knew. They didn't sleep that night. They sat against the wall, their shoulders nearly touching, neither speaking. Willie stayed awake, listening to the slow drip of condensation from the ceiling. A rhythm, familiar, soothing, then footsteps. Not echo, not memory, real, heavy boots, 4, maybe 5 pairs. Or, Alari turned her head sharply. They've tracked the beacon. Willie nodded, standing. He removed the flare from his pack and handed Alari the chant keeper. Keep it hidden. No, she said. They won't hear it from my mouth, but they might listen from yours. Footsteps closer, voices now. Echo is strong. Scans say 2 life forms. Organic, 1 human. Willie stood at the edge of the alcove entrance. His heart thundered in his chest. Not from fear, but from the weight of finally not running. 3 soldiers appeared, full combat suits, faceplates opaque. The insignia on their shoulders was unmistakable. Cultural Reclamation Authority. The lead raised a hand. You, human, step forward. You're harboring unauthorized cultural memory data. Under Directive 43, the artifact is to be surrendered. Willie didn't move. She is not an artifact. She is under genetic observation classification. She is a voice, he said, and I won't let you silence it again. The officer stepped closer. You're obstructing a state protocol. We have authority. And I have memory, Willie replied. Yours ends in ash. Hers survives. From behind him, Alari began to hum. The soldiers paused. The sound wasn't loud, but it changed the air. It moved like wind through dust, like breath through hollow bone. It wasn't a song of resistance. It was a song of witnessing. And that was worse for them. One soldier raised his weapon. Willie moved faster. He hurled the flare toward the narrow path, igniting the chamber in blinding blue. The blast wasn't violent, but it was disorienting. Sparks flashed. Static overloaded their visors. A cascade of sound filled the tunnel. In the chaos, Alari stepped forward, not away. She raised her voice, clear, unshaking, a single name, then another, spoken in rune, the names of women they had tried to erase. Each word she spoke was like fire in the stone. And then, another light. Behind the soldiers, the sound of rotors. Low altitude, fast. A secondary shaft hissed open. A voice echoed down the tunnel. Alari, Willie, now! Alari ran first, her satchel pressed to her chest. Willie followed, feet hammering the stone. The smugglers didn't wait long. The ramp sealed behind them before the soldiers could fire. As the ship lifted, Alari stood at the viewing window, watching the canyon fall away beneath her. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. But her breath caught once, a sharp inhale. She had survived, and now she could begin. Willie stood behind her, hand resting lightly on her shoulder. They didn't need to say anything, not yet. Above them, the stars opened again. This time, they weren't just escape, they were arrival. The sky over the water moon shimmered like liquid copper. Willie sat beneath a hand-woven awning, a slate journal resting on his lap, fingers smudged with ink. The breeze carried a sweet, salt-rich scent, native flora growing along the terrace slopes, their roots drinking from the deep mineral rivers running just beneath the clay soil. He could hear distant voices, children laughing, singing in mismatched rhythm. and beyond that the low hum of tools cutting stone for a new courtyard. Alari's voice rose above them all. Not loud, not commanding, just sure. She sat at the center of a semicircle, surrounded by 6 young ones. 3 human, 2 of the slender bird-boned Devethi, and 1 with ochre skin and vertical pupils, a desert-born child of a dying race. Ellery sang to them in rune, not the deep chants of mourning or memory, but the light, skipping songs used in teaching. She moved her hands as she sang, shaping the air, drawing spirals and loops in time with her voice. The children followed her gestures, imitating the sounds like a flock of eager birds. None of them flinched at the unfamiliar syllables. None asked for translation. They just listened. Willie closed his journal and watched. He didn't need to write anymore. Everything he could have preserved, she had become. It had taken years to reach this moment. After their escape from Veron's Edge, the smuggler ship had carried them across 3 sectors, avoiding major ports and relay stations. They'd changed ships twice, names once. Willie had burned every file, every record that might point back to her, not because he wanted her hidden, but because she deserved to choose how she would be seen. Eventually, they reached the planet with no designation, just a topographical code and a single archive scan from 40 years ago. Unmapped, undervalued, unclaimed. The settlers had come later, quiet ones, artists, farmers, archivists who no longer trusted centralized institutions. They welcomed Alari not as a symbol, not as a relic, but as a teacher, a living voice. Willie became the scribe again, but differently this time. Not as an academic, as a partner, a father, a listener. He built their home with his own hands, stone by stone, learning from the local builders, embedding rune symbols into the thresholds and doorways as Alari whispered their meanings into his ear. Their walls were thick, sun-warmed. Their windows opened toward the water. They never locked their doors. Some evenings she would sing while he sat beside her, carving names into the low wall around their garden. Each name was a survivor, a memory passed through breath and held in stone. And now, years later, she sat among children not as someone recovering, but as someone offering, no longer voiceless, no longer waiting to be heard. She glanced over her shoulder, catching Willie's gaze. He smiled. She didn't return the smile. She nodded, slow and deliberate, as if to say, "You see it now, don't you?" And he did. This was what survival looked like when it wasn't defined by running. A small boy stood from the group and ran over to Alari, holding out a piece of bark etched with clumsy spiral lines. He said something in a half-formed version of rune. Not quite correct, but full of intent. Alari crouched to his level and responded in kind, guiding his fingers along the markings, helping him complete the pattern. Willie's chest tightened with something warm and unspeakable. This wasn't preservation. This was continuation. He stood, walking down the stone path toward her, the dust warm beneath his feet. She looked up as he approached, and the children instinctively gave him space, not because they feared him, but because they understood. The way children sometimes just know. He knelt beside Alari and held out a folded scrap of paper. She took it, opened it. Inside, a spiral drawn in dark ink, Willie's handwriting, tight and practiced. But in the center of the spiral was something new. A single word in rune surrounded by a ring of names. Alari traced it with her finger, lips parting just slightly. "It means seed," she said. He nodded. "I thought it should begin here." She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned in and pressed her forehead gently to his. Not a kiss, something quieter, more complete. When she pulled back, she whispered, "You remembered the breath order." Willie smiled. "You're a good teacher." "No," she said. "You listened when I had no words. That is not teaching. That is love." He had no reply for that, not one that needed saying. That night, they lit the garden lanterns. Not electric, not automated. Flame-fed glass, each one painted with a symbol from a different forgotten culture. The children ran barefoot beneath them, casting long shadows against the clay walls. Someone played a stringed instrument built from native wood and scavenged wire. Someone else sang in broken rune, joyful, fearless. Willie sat by the fire with Alari beside him. Her fingers were streaked with ink from the lesson earlier. Her eyes reflected the firelight. He reached into his satchel and removed the final journal. This one wasn't full of footnotes or source citations. It had no formatting, no structure, just story. He passed it to her. Alari opened to the first page and read aloud. The woman they sold for nothing. She paused, then looked at him. You should finish it. He nodded, eyes steady. And the voice that changed everything. She closed the book and held it in her lap. They'll come looking again, she said. Maybe, he said. And what then? Then we sing louder. She leaned her head against his shoulder. They watched the fire, surrounded by laughter, language, and light. Not a single part of their story was left unsaid. Not a single thread left frayed. And across the moonlit water their voices rose. Human and alien, old and new, tangled in song.